Before this time, the Feast of All Saints, also known as All Hallows, was celebrated throughout the Christian world since the 4th century to mainly commemorate all the martyrs of the Church in either April or May, including Ireland. The Franks, then the English, were the first to follow Rome in celebrating the Feast of All Saints on November 1st. This became official under Pope Gregory VII in the early 9th century. The word Halloween merely refers to October 31st being the day of All Hallows' Eve, and later November 2nd also becoming part of the Triundum with the commemoration of All Souls' Day, on which prayers and philanthropic acts were done on behalf of the dead, which was also part of established Christian tradition since the early centuries of the Church. This may come as a shock to some who believe that the myth of Halloween has its origins or is associated with paganism or Satanism. The truth is that Halloween never was and never has been associated with paganism or Satanism, though some pagans and Satanists may embrace it as part of the melting pot which we now call America. Instead, what we find is that the Church established Hallowmass as original holy days, not to sanctify an old pagan celebration among the Celts, as has been popularly and falsely believed, but to celebrate an already well-established feast dedicated to the saints of the Church. Up until the 19th century, Halloween in Western Europe and America was a firmly Roman Catholic feast that acquired and developed various cultural traditions, as all major holidays did at the time and still do. The mythology that Halloween had pagan origins prior to Christian times arose for the first time in the 19th century among Celtic scholars who had their own personal agendas in falsifying history. They came up with the idea that October 31st through November 2nd were days when pagan Celtic peoples celebrated a feast of the dead known as Samhain, even though there is no historical record of such a feast among the ancient Celts. How did they come up with this? It was believed at the time that Christian feast days, such as Christmas and Easter, had pagan origins, that the Church merely Christianized established pagan celebrations to win over converts. The way the Celtic scholars explained the origins for the Feast of All Saints, which was popular among the Irish of the 19th century, was by tracing it back to the ancient Celts, without historical perspective. Though these false ideas are still popularly believed today, any true, honest historian can easily spot the agenda in these falsifications of history, and they have been firmly discredited. The question then comes up, what about the connection of Halloween with Satanism? This first entered the popular American imagination in the 1960s through urban mythology created by conservative fundamental Christians. These fundamentalist Protestants, already opposed to the Roman Catholic Feast of All Saints, sought to demonize the holiday by basing their research on 19th century Celtic scholars. Through them, Samhain became a pagan god. An alternative name for Satan, and that practices like trick-or-treating were originally established out of fear to appease dead spirits, which were really demons. They would hysterically say those who oppose Christ are known to organize on Halloween to observe satanic rituals, to cast spells, to oppose churches and families, to perform sacrilegious acts, and to even offer blood sacrifices to Satan. It didn't help at the time that through Hollywood, 19th century monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein and the Wolfman from Gothic literature were gaining in popularity, and they became established costumes for children. And then in the late 1960s, Anton LaVey, the founder of existential Satanism and the Church of Satan in San Francisco, took advantage of this urban myth among fundamentalist Christians, whom he most wanted to provoke, and established Halloween as one of the three major holidays of the Church of Satan. Along with Satanists' own birthday, since LaVeyan Satanism is atheistic and about worship of oneself. This marketing maneuver by Anton LaVey was taken seriously by fundamentalists, who already feared the holiday. Fundamentalists began to take advantage of this new connection by eventually creating what has been called the satanic panic of the 1970s and early 1980s. Urban myths about Halloween grew during this time to scare people away from celebrating Halloween, such as making up stories of crazed adults who sought to harm innocent trick-or-treaters by planting poison or razor blades in children's candy, and how pumpkins were carved to depict the facial expressions of the damned in hell. This fundamentalist literature, most popularly identified with people like Jack Chick, soon became the established opinion of just about every Christian church in America, even among Roman Catholics who still celebrate Hallowmass between October 31st and November 2nd. Interesting, huh? Okay, I'm looking at a question here. Since the days of the so-called Satanic Panic, Christians have generally viewed Halloween as pagan and satanic. What this has done is basically handed over the holiday to take on more of a pagan and satanic character, which it did not generally have prior to this time. This is an unfortunate lesson of what happens when the church demonizes rather than sanctifies. Christians open the door to the devil, and the devil has taken every advantage. Now, what's meant by that statement? We know historically that Halloween, All Hallows Eve, had very strong Christian origins and connections. Because of the westernization of the holiday and the influence of the satanic movement in the 60s and 70s, and the association of Hollywood from Halloween to the monsters and demons and horror figures. What happened? Culturally wise, what do we see growing? More costumes for Halloween of devils and demons and witches and monsters, right? I can remember growing up and asking my parents, I don't want to be a monster. I want to dress up as St. Nicholas. And not that my parents were against it. They just couldn't find a St. Nicholas costume. And there was certainly not that creativity in my family to make up our own St. Nicholas costume. I can remember coming here to my parish in the late 80s. And we had instituted, obviously, a Halloween party. And I kept insisting that we kind of avoid the scary costumes and really have costumes of saints, of good people, good American characterizations. And let's stay away from the gruesome, gory monsters and horrible masks and whatever. I met with a lot of resistance. Today, let's look at the American holiday of Halloween. While religious holidays in America tend to be personal or family holidays that are embraced at best by a small community, Halloween is one of those few days open to the entire community, and its secular cultural purpose is meant to show goodwill among neighbors. The reason for this is because in the early 20th century, Halloween was still very much a Christian holiday, but it also became a day in which the melting pot of cultural traditions gathered to form a national family secular holiday. In the European late Middle Ages, it was a custom at Christmas and on All Souls' Day for poor children to go door to door and beg for money and food. In 1605, Guy Fawkes' abortive effort to blow up the British Parliament on November 5th led to the creation of Guy Fawkes Day, which became associated with mischief and violence. In the mid-19th century, New York poor children called ragamuffins combined these two traditions and began dressing up in costumes and begging for pennies on Thanksgiving Day. A tradition of vandalism among youthful boys began to spread throughout the country at this time. With urbanization and poverty on the rise in the early 20th century, communities came to realize that they needed to contain their violence and vandalism. It was decided at this time, beginning in the 1920s and throughout the 1930s, to make Halloween a secular family celebration of goodwill. In the late 20s and 30s, as Halloween became a popular secular celebration, it had little difference with Thanksgiving and the 4th of July. People would gather in the town square and take part in parade and play various games. Halloween also had some Victorian elements that were popular at the time, such as spiritualism and divination, which almost everyone throughout America, Europe, and Russia experimented with at this time throughout the year. Even respected Orthodox Christians like Dostoevsky. Slowly, also the traditional British ghost story of Christmas Eve, told before a fire, the most popular being Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, slowly transferred to Halloween. The plan seemed to work to change the autumn season from a time of vandalism and violence among youth to a time of family, fun, and games. In the late 1930s, traditions such as trick-or-treating were established to ensure children would behave by being rewarded by neighbors with treats by dressing up in costumes and showing good behavior, rather than being mischievous tricksters who brought harm to the neighborhood. It was a clever distraction, the author writes. With the rise in popularity and creativity by comic books and horror movies, these elements also became part of the costuming of children and adults alike. These elements also helped associate Halloween throughout the rest of the 20th century as a time of the macabre, though much less harmful than it was in the late 19th and early 20th century, with the rise of violence and vandalism at the time. Only small elements of such mischievousness have survived in our times. Based on all this information, what should the Orthodox Church's response be today? Do we continue to demonize this holiday by way of influence from fundamentalist Protestants and neo-pagans? Or do we separate the agreeable and disagreeable elements of the feast day, the honey and the hemlock, and allow it to be as it is? Like every holiday in America, Halloween certainly has many disagreeable elements, but is this enough justification to prevent children from dressing up in a costume and having innocent, childish fun? I think what we can say safely is that we leave it up to our people, viewers, those who are experienced living in the world, to decide based on an educated opinion of the facts. But keep in mind that famous saying of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, quote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." A suggestion, if I may. I think the Orthodox Church in America should embrace Halloween as much as it is permissible, like any other holiday. There are no rules how to celebrate Halloween, so any disagreeable element can be ruled out. One need not go to a psychic on Halloween or participate in any pagan ceremony. It is not a rule to take on a persona of evil or become over-sexualized or to vandalize and attend drunken parties to have fun on Halloween. Halloween should be about expressing oneself in whatever way one chooses and have costumes that reflect this based on one's faith. Christians, young and old alike, are not compelled to do what they didn't want to do on Halloween if they want to have some participation in it. It's all right to go trick-or-treating and give out candy on Halloween. Such practices have no evil element. We could even go so far as to say that it actually falls in line with the Christian attitude of showing neighborly love and hospitality. All Christian homes should turn on their lights and welcome their neighbors' children on Halloween. And even more, should their neighbors do the same. So where are we with this? I think a lot of it goes to guidance and being educated. For too long, for years, for decades, if you will, we Christians have really minimized the aspect of our Christian history, the cult of the saints in the church, and we've allowed the substituting of the saints and all the famous saint figures, especially in the time of Al Hallows Eve and Halloween, to be supplanted by the horror figures, right? What's the guy's name? Freddy, right? Vampires, the Night of the Living Dead, the zombies, all that stuff. Wouldn't it be interesting to teach our children and our grandchildren the wonderful, realistic historical figures of the church that we can help perpetuate their memories by incorporating them into our children's going out and trick-or-treating and dressing up as costumes of saints and famous church figures? That would be a wonderful educational tool, in my humble opinion. But we'll have to see. So that's all I have. Just some food for thought about Halloween. Again, it is not a pagan feast day. Its roots are grounded in the church, precisely to honor and remember the departed martyrs of the church. Okay? That's all I have for today. I hope this motivates us to take a closer look at how we understand and relate to the Halloween day, and able maybe to educate and enlighten our children and our grandchildren of the need to kind of get back to the true historical roots. Let me close, as usual, with our prayer to the Mother of God. O steadfast protection of Christians, constant advocate before the Creator, do not despise the cry of us sinners, but in your goodness come speedily to help those who call upon you in faith. Hasten to hear our petition and intercede for us, O Theotokos, for you always protect those who honor you. Dear viewers, we love you. We thank you for taking the time to be with us. Know that we lift you all up in prayer. We ask that you pray for us as well, because in lifting each other in prayer, we are truly united in Christ. Have a blessed day.